Maine, Chapter 8, Section 5. It was fall, and for the last time, Sam Adams bade Johnny summon the observers for 8 o'clock that night. After this, we will not meet again, for I believe Gage knows all about us. He might be moved to arrest Mr. Lorne. He might send soldiers to arrest us all. I hardly think they would hang the whole club, sir. Only you and Mr. Hancock. Johnny had meant this for a compliment, but Sam Adams looked more startled than pleased. It has been noticed that every so often many of us are seen going up and down Salt Lane, entering the printing shop. We must in the future meet in small groups, but once more and for the last time, and make as good a punch for us as you can. As Johnny went from house to house talking about unpaid bills of 8 shillings, he was thinking about the punch. Now let's take a moment here and remind ourselves. When Johnny says to these people, "Hey, you owe me 8 shillings, what does that mean? If you can't recall, pause the video and ask a neighbor. Not one ship had come into Boston for 5 months except British ships. Only the British officers had limes, lemons, and oranges these days. They and their friends among the Boston Tories. Remember, the punch had expensive spices, but also limes, lemons, and oranges. Miss Light had God's plenty of friends among the British officers. He'd get his tropical fruit there. Mrs. Bessie listened to him. And who's going to eat these fruits, or drink them, if I do give you some? Well, Sam Adams, for one. Don't say any more. Give me your dispatch bag, Johnny. She returned with it bulging. I just want to help you visualize this. A dispatch bag is kind of an old school way of saying messenger bag. So it would just be a bag where the strap goes across your body. It would be really good for if you were riding a horse, you wouldn't have to pull a backpack off of your back in order to access the contents. So don't say any more. Give me your dispatch bag, Johnny. She returned with it bulging. No limes, though. Izzy eats them all. Does she do tricks for them like she used to for the sailors along Hancock's Wharf? Tricks? Does she do tricks? Lieutenant Stranger has taught her a rigmarole, a song, about poor Nell Gwynn selling fruit at a theater. I don't need to tell you how she carries on. What happened to that Cousin Sewell? Cousin Sewell, you've probably forgotten, maybe you haven't. He was the one man working in Mr. Light's office who was uncomfortable with framing Johnny. So what happened to Cousin Sewell? Gone to Worcester, joined up with the Minutemen. But he's too fat and soft? No, from now on, nobody's too fat, nor soft, nor old, nor young. The time's coming. It would be a small meeting, for of the 22 original members, many had already left town to get away from the threat of arrest by the British. Josiah Quincy was in England. Of the 3 revolutionary doctors, only Church and Warren remained. Dr. Young had gone to a safer spot. James Otis was at the moment in Boston. Johnny had not notified him, although he had founded this club in the first place. Ever since he had grown so queer, the other members did not wish him about, even in his lucid or clear-minded periods. He talked and talked. Nobody could get a word in edgewise when James Otis talked. Remember, this was the man that they had not wanted to invite because also they were a little worried that he might tell all their secrets. The last meeting, started with the punch bowl on the table instead of ending with it. There was no chairman, no person officially in charge, nor was there any time when the 2 boys were supposed to withdraw. They were talking about how Gage, General Gage, remember he has replaced the governor as being in charge, so this is the military having taken over. They were talking about how Gage had at last dared send out a sortie, a battle, beyond the gate of Boston, and, before the Minutemen got word of their plans, they had seized cannon and gunpowder over in Charlestown, got into their boats, and back to Boston. Not one shot had been fired, and it was all too late when the alarm had been spread and thousands of armed farmers had arrived. By then, the British were safe home again. Yet, Sam Adams protested, this rising up of an army of 1,000 from the very soil of New England had badly frightened General Gage. Once the alarm spread that the British had left Boston, the system of calling up the Minutemen had worked well indeed. The trouble had been in Boston itself. In other words, gentlemen, it was our fault. If we could have known but an hour, 2 hours in advance what the British were intending, our men would have been there before the British troops arrived, instead of a half hour after they left. Johnny had been told off to carry letters for the British officers, to keep on good terms with the grooms and stable boys over at the African Queen. Somehow he had failed. He hadn't known. Nobody had known that 260 redcoats were getting into boats, slipping off up the Mystic, that's a river, seizing Yankee gunpowder, and rowing it back to Castle Island for themselves. Paul Revere was saying, "We must organize a better system of watching their movements, but in such a way that they will not realize they are being watched." Sam and John Adams were standing, and the other members were crowding about them, shaking hands with them, wishing them success at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. They were starting off the next day. Everyone was ready to give them advice on whom to see, what to say, or to prophesy or predict the outcome of this Congress. Paul Revere and Joseph Warren were apart a little, making plans for the spy system, which was badly needed. They called Johnny to them, but he could hear one of the men standing about the two Adamses saying, "But there must be some hope we can still patch up our differences with England. Sir, you will work for peace." Sam Adams said nothing for a moment. He trusted these men about him as he trusted no one else in the world. Now pause. Don't look at the next line. What does Sam Adams want? Make that quick prediction. No, that time is past. I will work for war, the complete freedom of these colonies from any European power. We can have that freedom only by fighting for it. God grant we fight soon. For 10 years we've tried this and we've tried that. We've tried to placate them and they to placate us. Placate means like make them feel better. Gentlemen, you know it has not worked. I will not work for peace. Peace, peace, and there is no peace. But I will in Philadelphia. Play a cautious part, not throw all my cards on the table. Oh no. But nevertheless, I will work for one thing. War. Bloody and terrible death and destruction. But out of it shall come such a country as has never been seen before on this earth. We will fight. There was a heavy footstep across the floor of the shop below. Rab leaped to the ladder's head. "James Otis," he reported to the men standing about Adams. "Well," said Sam Adams a little crossly, a little angrily, "no one needs stay and listen to him. He shot his bolt years ago. Still talking about the natural rights of man and the glories of the British Empire. You and I, John, had as well go home and get a good night's sleep before leaving at dawn tomorrow." Now, here's this really cool idiom. He shot his bolt years ago. Let's take a look at what that actually means. And James Otis, a real historical figure. We've seen him before. He was a lawyer and early advocate for revolution against British rule. He's also the subject of the final question of your Chapter 8 homework, which will definitely, very sure, I'm not even winking, I'm just telling you, this will be an essay. So make sure you pay attention to this part. So here's this idiom, shot his bolt. To say that someone has shot his bolt means that he's already reached the highest peak of achievement, and it's all downhill from there. It's basically Sam Adams saying that James Otis can't be useful at this point. Otis pulled his bulk up the ladder. If no one was glad to see him, at least no one was so discourteous or rude as to leave. Mr. Otis was immediately shown every honor, given a comfortable armchair and a tankard of punch. Seemingly, he was not in a talkative mood tonight. The broad, ruddy or red, good-natured face turned left and right, nodding casually to his friends, taking it for granted that he was still a great man among them, instead of a milestone they all believed they had passed years before. He sniffed at his punch and sipped a little. "Sammy, oh my goodness, could you imagine addressing one of the founding fathers of America as Sammy?" James Otis does. "Sammy," he said to Sam Adams, "my coming interrupted something you were saying. We will fight? You had got that far." "Why, yes, that's no secret." "For what will we fight?" "To free Boston from these infernal redcoats and—" "No," said Otis. "Boy, give me more punch." "That's not enough reason for going into a war. Did any occupied city ever have better treatment than we've had from the British? Has one rebellious newspaper been stopped? One treasonable speech? Where are the firing squads, the jails jammed with political prisoners? What about the gallows for you, Sam Adams? And you, John Hancock? It has never been set up. I hate those infernal British troops spread all over my town as much as you do. Can't move these days without stepping on a soldier. But we are not going off into a civil war merely to get them out of Boston. Why are we going to fight? Why? Why? There was an embarrassed silence. Sam Adams was the acknowledged ringleader. It was for him to speak now. We will fight for the rights of Americans. England cannot take our money away by taxes. No, no. For something more important than the pocketbooks of our American citizens. So let's pause a moment and talk about that. I'm going to clarify. This is another instance of putting principles over pocketbooks, right? Sam Adams tries to justify the revolution by saying England cannot take away our money by taxes. But James Otis puts him in his place, says this is about way more than pocketbooks, wallets, purses. Remember, this is what we had talked about before. The Boston Tea Party was not because of the tiny little tax, but because of the principle or the idea that it was unfair. These are people who put their principles above their pocketbooks. And that's what James Otis is trying to remind Sam Adams here. Rab said, "For the rights of Englishmen, everywhere." Why stop with Englishmen? Otis was warming up. He had a wide mouth, crooked and generous. He settled back in his chair, and then he began to talk. It was such talk as Johnny had never heard before. The words surged up through the big body, flowed out of the broad mouth. He never raised his voice, and he went on and on. Sometimes Johnny felt so intoxicated by the mere sound of the words that he hardly followed the sense. Johnny was almost drunk on these words. That soft, low voice flowed over him, submerged him. For men and women and children all over the world, he said, you were right, you tall, dark boy, for even as we shoot down the British soldiers, we are fighting for rights such as they will be enjoying 100 years from now. There shall be no more tyranny. A handful of men cannot seize power over thousands. A man shall choose who it is shall rule over him. The peasants of France, the serfs of Russia, hardly more than animals now. But because we fight, they shall see freedom like a new sun rising in the west. Those natural rights God has given to every man, no matter how humble, he smiled suddenly and said, or crazy, and took a good pull at his tankard. So let's pause here in the middle of this speech. Natural rights. Think back to the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. We the people, all those things. He's talking about the natural rights of man, those God-given rights, endowed by our Creator. All of those things. This is what James Otis is saying, and that's what Jefferson writes into the Declaration of Independence. The battle we win over the worst in England shall benefit the best in England. How well are they over there represented when it comes to taxes? Not very well. It will be better for them when we have won this war. Will French peasants go on forever pulling off their caps and saying, "Oui, monsieur," when the gold coaches run down their children? They will not. And pause for historical pro tip. The French Revolution began in 1789, and all of those French peasants, the French lower classes, had a really bloody encounter with all of the royals. That's where the Marie Antoinette stuff happened, the guillotine and heads rolling. It's not a beautiful time. And all those German states, Italy, are they nothing but soldiers? Will no one show them the rights of good citizens? So we hold up our torch, and do not forget it was lighted upon the fires of England, and we will set it as a new sun to lighten a world. Sam Adams, anxious to get that good night's sleep before starting next day for Philadelphia, was smiling slightly, nodding his gray head, seeming to agree. He was bored. It does not matter, he was thinking, what James Otis says these days, sane or crazy. Joseph Warren's fair, responsive face was aflame. The torch Otis had been talking about seemed reflected in his eyes. "We are lucky men," he murmured, "for we have a cause worth dying for. This honor is not given to every generation." Now I want you to take a moment and put a post-it note there, and we will come back to this. We will come back to this after we finish the novel, because this line here is very much indicative of when Esther Forbes was writing this novel. This novel was published during World War II. So we're going to come back to this. Boy, said Otis to Johnny, fill my tankard. Now that's tankard 3 that he's getting, full of this alcoholic punch. It was not until he had drained it and wiped his mouth on the back of his hand that he spoke again. All sat silently waiting for him. He had, and not for the first time, cast a spell upon them. They say, he began again, my wits left me after I got hit on the head by that customs official. That's what you think, eh, Mr. Sam Adams? Oh, no, indeed, Mr. Otis. Some of us will give our wits, he said. Some of us all our property. John Hancock, did you hear that? Property. That hurts, eh? To give one's silver wine coolers, one's coach and four, and the gold buttons off one's sprigged satin waistcoats. Hancock looked him straight in the face, and Johnny had never before liked him so well. I am ready, he said. I can get along without all that. You, Paul Revere, you'll give up that silver craft you love? God made you to make silver, not war. Revere smiled. There's a time for the casting of silver and a time for the casting of cannon. If that's not in the Bible, it should be. Now that is what we call an allusion, a reference to the Bible. He's referring to Ecclesiastes, and we can talk about that at a later date. But right now we're going to focus on James Otis. Dr. Warren, you've a young family. You know quite well, if you get killed, they may literally starve. Warren said, I've thought of all that long ago. And you, John Adams, you've built up a very nice little law practice, stealing away my clients, I notice. Oh, well, so it goes. Each shall give according to his own abilities, and some, he turned directly to Rab, some will give their lives, all the years of their maturity, all the children they never live to have, the serenity, the peace of old age. To die so young is more than merely dying. It is to lose so large a part of life. Rab was looking straight at Otis. His arms were folded across his chest, his head flung back a little, his lips parted as though he would speak, but he did not. Even you, my old friend, my old enemy? How shall I call you, Sam Adams? Even you will give the best you have. A genius for politics. Oh, go to Philadelphia. Pull all the wool, pull all the strings and all the wires. Yes, go, and God go with you. We need you, Sam. We must fight this war. You'll play your part. But what it is really about, you'll never know. James Otis was on his feet, his head close against the rafters that cut down into the attic, making it the shape of a tent. Otis put out his arms. It is all so much simpler than you think, he said. He lifted his hands and pushed against the rafters. So take a moment and visualize. This is a large man. He's tall, and he's standing in an attic. So it's a triangle shape. He's almost crushed by these rafters. He's easily touching the rafters. His head is very, very close to the ceiling. And now he's visualizing lifting the ceiling up by pushing up at the rafters. And if you tuned out, tune back in for this. We give all we have, lives, property, safety, skills. We fight, we die for a simple thing, only that a man can stand up. With a curt nod, he was gone. Johnny was standing close to Rab. It had frightened him when Mr. Otis had said, some will give their lives, and looked straight at Rab. Die so that a man can stand up. We will talk about this a lot. If you need to talk about it right now, if you need to kind of break this down, go ahead and pause the video. Make yourself a Post-it is my recommendation. Otherwise, let's keep going. Once more, Sam Adams had the center of attention. He was again buttoning up his coat, preparing to leave. But first he turned to Revere. Now he is gone. We can talk a moment about that spy system you think you can organize here in Boston? Paul Revere, like his friend Joseph Warren, was still slightly under the spell of James Otis. I had not thought about it that way before, he said, not answering Sam Adams' words. You know, my father had to flee France because of the tyranny over there. He was only a child. But now, in a way, I'm fighting for that child. that no frightened lost child ever is sent out a refugee from his own country because of race or religion. Then he pulled himself together and answered Sam Adams' remarks about the spy system. That night, when the boys were both in bed, Johnny heard Rab, usually a heavy sleeper, turning and turning. "Johnny," he said at last, "are you awake?" "Yes." "What was it he said?" "That a man can stand up." Rab sighed and stopped turning. In a few moments he was asleep. As often had happened before, it was the younger boy who lay wide-eyed in the darkness. That a man can stand up. He'd never forget Otis with his hands pushed up against the cramping rafters over his head. That a man can stand up. As simple as that. And a strange new sun rising in the west. Remember, the sun rises in the east. A sun that was to illumine a world to come. That is something to think about. Make sure that you are thinking about this principles over pocketbook scenario and about this idea that these men are starting a revolution not over money, but for principles, for freedom, for rights. And please spend the rest of your time working on your thoughts about that.